People who have developed film, what is the most shocking thing you have ever seen on a customer's camera? Not something shocking on the camera per se, but a friend of mine received a formal letter telling him he was no longer allowed to develop film at Walmart because they didn't want their technicians exposed to that kind of filth. He would take disposable cameras to parties and get fat girls to flash him. Story 2. Many years ago, I worked the night photo lab shift at a Walgreens. I saw more than my fair share of sex and general things you would expect someone to bring in at 2 a.m. to be ran. But the most memorable was a guy that worked at a local strip club. He came in every 2 or 3 weeks with several rolls shot of stage shows and in the dressing room of all the girls. He would wait on them to get done, then stand there at the counter, going through them, trying to show them to me. Story 3. Had a mother come in and develop a roll she found in a drawer with some family pics and her son getting BJ from some chick. Story 4. The weirdest ones I saw involved a middle-aged couple who either owned a million pets or got friends to lend them pets for awkward photo shoots. They came in every week with a new set to develop. Cats in football uniforms, guinea pigs with glasses, etc. One time I developed a photo shoot of a bunch of lizards dressed like cowboys in front of a cardboard box colored to look like an old western. Weird stuff. Story 5. Did 1-hour photo at a drugstore. Weirdest roll. 9 shots of Christmas with the family, 5 shots of 2 girls shaving each other's pussy hair in a bathtub. Then the rest of the roll was back to Christmas with the family. Edit. Yes. Autocorrect error. Not public hair. Sorry. Story 6. I once developed pictures for a guy who had pics of himself in his underwear and hiking boots out on a trail. Then there was another group from someone else of detailed pictures of a deer that had failed at jumping a decorative fence and impaled itself on the top. Story 7. A 360-degree view of a naked girl on her knees. It was relatively softcore, but I thought it was so odd that the dude had shot 24 photos in a circle around her. Also, pictures from a bachelor party. The party went sound. People were covered in vomit. They were escort. I did about 500 double takes while processing that one. Story 8. Well, other than tits and junks, I developed film for some older lady whose 50-year-old son went missing. They found his body in a field 8 days afterwards, and even though it wasn't his actual body, it was of where his body was in the picture. I think of a snow angel, but in a patch of tall grass and completely black. It also turned out I was the last person to see this guy alive. I sold him batteries. Oddly enough, this lady thinks that her other son hit him and he passed. So I'm not sure what about it was more shocking, the fact that it was a photo from a crime scene or the fact that I saw this dude the night he passed. Story 9. Used to work at Target Photo Lab when I was 16, 2006, which was illegal, but my store told me to run to customer service if OSHA ever came in. Anyway, Target's policy is that it is up to the employee's discretion to develop whatever they are not morally opposed to, as long as it was not illegal. Being that I was 17 years old, this probably shouldn't have applied to me, but I didn't give a crap. Worst, lady with cigars stuck inside of her during group sex. Best, guy I was sort of starting to date in high school had his little sister come in and develop a roll of film with photo editing. That means I preview the photos and edit them before printing. Was just a bunch of photos of trees and crap until I came to pictures of pieces of paper on a picnic table that in each picture said, "Will you go to homecoming with me?" He then came in to pick up the pictures himself for the answer, and I obviously said yes. Really nice guy. But his mom hated me for calling their Italian foreign exchange student pushy. I could have called her an awful idiot like she was, but apparently pushy was too much. So there went that. Story 10. I once had a 20-year-old develop photos of her giving a BJ, complete with pearl necklace at the end. She came in to pick them up with her dad, and the look on her face when she opened the envelope to check the pics was priceless. She'd clearly forgotten what was on that roll of film. I, however, will never forget. Story 11. Kind of related, my dad's friend, Dale, lives in Colorado, and he has a cabin in the mountains. Well, he had gotten his hunting license taken away, so my dad asks him why he had it taken away. So Dale says that there was a bear breaking into cabins nearby and was a potential danger to the people living there. So long story short, Dale hit the bear out of season and is caught. He was caught by the women devolving photos. The judge says to Dale, "I probably would have let you go if there wasn't these pictures of the bear." And there were multiple pictures of the bear sitting at a card table with a hat on, cigarette in its mouth, sunglasses on, beer in paw, with a deck of cards. Story 12. Worked as a custom black and white printer. Saw lots of nudity, but the weirdest thing I saw was when I was putting together a large order of old family pictures. Lots of pictures of children growing up through the 50 and 60. About halfway through the order, I realized one of the children was Sigourney Weaver. Story 13. A death scene. I worked at a grocery store in the lobby, so I developed a lot of film. This was a picture of a man laying in bed, dead. We called the police, and they waited for the person to pick the film up. He was actually a detective and needed it processed right away, so he gave it to me knowing full well what was on it instead of using the police lab. I was young, and it was probably one of the worst things I've seen. Story 14. I work at a 1-hour photo lab. Some lady printed out pictures of her infant son's circumcision. That one was probably the most shocking to me. We had a woman come in who was probably in her 50s. She tried to print out some nude pictures of herself. Me and my coworker had to explain to her that we couldn't print them because it was against company policy. She got mad and told us. But I still look good for my age, see? Like as if we were going to agree with her and let her do it. This one's not really shocking, but it makes me laugh when I think about it. I had a little old lady come in one day to print out some pictures. She calls me over to the kiosk and asks for my opinion. She has a bunch of selfies and wants to know which one is the best because she's going to try online dating and needs a good profile picture. The saddest one was a lady who was about 50 years old. She came in to get some pictures of herself printed. She said she was trying to choose pictures for her obituary because she'd just been diagnosed with some disease, and doctors told her she may not live past another 6 months. I really had no words for that one. Completely caught me off guard. Most pictures I print are of vacations, family, friends, babies, pets, etc., but this one still haunts me. I'm pretty sure it's been over 6 months since I seen that woman. Makes me wonder how she is. Story 15. My mom developed photos, or whatever you would call it these days, for years. She said she would get nudes once in a while. Never anyone you would want to see nude anyway. We also lived next to a very popular mountain bike park, and one time she found some photos of a guy's ugly ankle after he had snapped it. She had to call the cops, obviously. I feel like he must have wanted to be caught or something. Story 16. I knew someone who developed film. He said that one day an old lady came in with a battery and asked him to develop it. She'd obviously opened the wrong hole on her camera. Story 17. During my time in a Walgreens photo lab years ago, the funniest thing I recall seeing was a roll of film from a party. The guy who dropped the disposable camera off appeared in one of the pictures in tightly whites wearing a cowboy hat, boots, and a belt with toy six-shooters while he was chugging a bottle of Miller Lite. The creepiest involves a story. An older man in his 50 or so came in looking really nervous. When he dropped off his film, he had a weird, rambling story he gave me about how his son and daughter-in-law abused his granddaughter and that his lawyer instructed him to take some pictures. So not to worry about what I saw because his lawyer said it was okay. It was pretty sickening. As per company policy, we called the police, developed the film, and made a second set to turn over to the police with the address, phone number, name the customer gave us as evidence. We weren't ever told what happened, but I never saw the guy again, so I hope he's in prison. Story 18. I worked at a photo lab and had a set of regulars that would come in. It was a wife, her husband, and young son. They were the picture-perfect family. I was a lonely person at the time and would make doubles of these photos and tack them onto my apartment wall resembling a collage. It wasn't hard to figure out where they lived, and when they weren't home, I'd sneak in and wander about like I was an actual resident. I'd even fit into the husband's wardrobe and lounge around in one of his sweaters. I'd do this routinely as it was an escape into a visualization of a family I wish I was a part of. Story 19. Worked at the Walmart photo lab circa 2006. It was actually a really chill job, and I saw my fair share of weird nudity, and even a woman in a fancy hotel room with a towel folded in the shape of a cobra. However, by far the weirdest thing I've ever experienced was a roll of film that had all of these awesome dynamic action shots of this one dude. It was him diving into water from tall rocks, skydiving, dirt bike riding, etc. He was doing all of these amazing things, and I was getting so jealous, but also excited to talk about this with him when he came in. I like to have a relationship with the cool customers. But then I got to the end of the roll of film. It was him. He passed. I never found out how it happened or anything, but it was just one of those shocking moments that sticks with you. I didn't expect him to be passed after watching him live his life to the fullest like that. Story 20. This story is about a former co-worker of mine's. I used to work at a big health store. Some of the stores can develop pictures. We usually deny requests to develop pictures near closing because it would be too time-consuming as we have other closing duties. Apparently, some guy came in and pleaded with my coworker, telling him that he needed these pictures out as soon as possible, and that he'll be back in an hour or so to pick them up. So my coworker decided to develop pictures. That's when he realized all of the photos were just snaps of damn crap, like crap on the toilet, crap in the grass, crap on a chair, just crap. Obviously, the guy didn't come back and my coworker was damn livid. Hands down the funniest thing a coworker has told me. I still give him crap about it when I come in to visit. Story 21. A man came in with a few cans of 8mm film to be processed and digitized. It was something he'd had in the attic since the 70s. I think they belonged to my dad, and he recently passed away, and was curious as to what was on them. He came in with his wife and kids, and was full of anticipation and nostalgia. Most reels we got at this processing company were Christmas or holiday videos full of happy times long forgotten. I processed the reels and then captured the footage onto the computer. I then knew I had a difficult conversation to have and started trying to figure out what to say. Instead of a happy family home movie with his dad and the family bringing back warm memories, there were 4 reels of his dad, handlebar mustache, shell suit, pleasure himself furiously on the bonnet of a Ford Capri. The next day, his beaming son turned up with the family to collect the reels. Normally we play a section back in the studio just to show them it's all worked, and they're happy with the quality, but I just had to take him aside and say, "You might not want to show the family this." Childhood ruined, he discovered a film of his dad, pleasure himself in the attic. Story 22. I worked as a lab manager at a Wolf camera many years back. I'm talking about when 35mm was still the majority of cameras, and digital cameras were starting to catch on. So here goes from my memory. Crime scene photos. Many of the smaller townships surrounding our location did not have their own means to process their film. Again, this is just before the dawn of digital. Many of the townships would bring their rolls of crime scenes to us to process. Random acts of adult films, this couple always came in with rolls of film at least once a month. Now, I've seen all kinds of adult films and fetish stuff, but this case was, well, random. By that, I mean that there would be 10 frames at a family event, then 3 random fetish adult film of the couple, and then straight back to a couple frames of more adult film. The particular fetish the couple was into was the wife wearing black stockings and cupping the husband's junk with her feet. Local plastic surgeons before and after shots. Oh, my favorite. The husband was the plastic surgeon, and his incredibly hot wife and business partner would drop off rolls not only to be developed, but also to be put to CD. Seeing before and after shots of breast enhancements, both enhancements and reductions, were pretty sweet for such a low-paying job. The name of the wife was the most ironic thing of it all. Her name was Ivana Weiner. I know. Sounds like a bullcrap made-up name. Nope. We had a policy of checking ID for credit card purchases. Lo and behold, that was her name. She was Eastern European blonde with an accent and so hot. Story 23. I worked at a CVS photo lab like 14 years ago. Back then, the developed pictures would fall from the top of the machine into a shelf below, and a motorized arm would push pictures off to the side into a neat little stack. I threw in a roll for development right before lunch. Came back, and the photo on top was some dude's junk, clear as day. It had been sitting there in plain sight for at least 45 minutes. Junk pics were a common occurrence, but I found this scenario particularly funny. Story 24. I was a head photo specialist for Walgreens in college. We sold a reusable, disposable camera that would get loaded with film for free every time they brought it in for 1 hour processing. 2 young girls were with an older man, and they brought in a camera for development. The pictures began innocent enough, but around 10 images and they became very graphic. I immediately covered the drying rack and alerted my store manager. One look at the images and he had the local PD on the phone. About an hour later, the girls came in to pick up their images, and the police stepped in to speak with them. The older man was in the car waiting, so another officer went outside and brought him in. Turns out, the man was one of the girls' father, and while he was working, his daughter and her best friend decided to do their best to mimic images they found browsing the internet. The images and negatives were destroyed, and the girls were given a lesson on how dangerous this could have been for them and the father. Story 25. A good friend of mine worked at a fancy, artsy development lab. She showed me a roll she had developed, wherein the subject was a man's ass, with a face drawn on it, completing different daily tasks, such as eating eggs, smoking a cigar, reading the newspaper, drinking a beer, etc. Story 26. The craziest photo I ever saw was an old man having sex with lady from behind while woman slapped his ass. People seemed to be watching in the background, so I still have no idea what was going on. It was the only photo I ever made a copy of for myself, so I could put it on my fridge. I figured my roommates at the time would never believe me. Funniest moment, though, was when a guy walked in and said, "So, do you develop photos?" "Yes," I replied politely, even though it was a dumb question. "Well, CVS developed my negatives, but they won't print my photos because of what's on them. Will you?" "No, it's just me. But since I already have the negatives, I only want to develop the ones I like." "Sure, why not?" So I turned on the backlight and we proceeded to discuss which self-portraits of his junk were actually worthy of printing. To be fair, if I was hung like this guy, I would have made posters and hung them in my living room. Story 27. I worked in a photo lab for 3 years through high school and just after before college. Funniest. Spank material audition. Beautiful girl my age, 18 years old at the time, drops off a roll of film to be developed. Stammer my way through the conversation the best my nerdy boy, not yet a man self could do, and get to developing film. Cut her to the front of the development line even though we had a rush. Didn't know what was on the film, but turned out to be a bunch of naked pictures taken by a third person. Cars, boats, bedrooms were all there, but with terrible lighting. Anyway, I get transferred to another store and about a year goes by. This gorgeous woman comes walking into my store. We're talking and her craphead boyfriend's wannabe Integra Type R, 4 doors is a giveaway bro, keeps having the alarm go off due to thunder from the storm outside. We start talking as he's outside fixing his alarm. I mention that she looks familiar, and she says the same thing. We're both trying to figure it out for a moment when she pipes up and says in a bubbly way, "You developed my nudes." I blinked, blushed, and admitted to being the one who indeed had developed her images. Turns out that they were her audition images for Playboy and Penthouse. Anyway, she thanked me for my efforts, but she knew the lighting was terrible when she looked at them. We had a laugh. Her boyfriend yelled something like, "Come on, we gotta go," and they left. Story 28. Let's see the miracle of birth several times, nude girl in a field. She was the one who dropped off the film and was attractive. Unattractive woman in poses like exposing herself. Digital on a kiosk so other people would have seen them as she made the order. Mostly, especially with digital, you pretend not to notice something embarrassing. Do BJ, for example, while helping a customer. Story 29. Sam's Club employee here. Someone called over the walkie for member assistance and photo. Since I cover everything in the tech department, I responded and made my way over there, where there was a woman who was decent looking, albeit with a bun in the oven. She was standing at the Kodak kiosk. There's a Kodak Kiosk Connect app that can be downloaded to your phone, and once you do so, you can connect to the wireless connection that the kiosk creates. Once that connection is established, the member has the option of viewing the photos they want to print on their phone, or they can view their album directly on the kiosk screen. Now that the setup is out of the way, the awkwardness begins. The photo department is right next to our front door and exit. Our door greeter, a lovely little old lady, walked over and introduced me to the pregnant woman. It was her daughter. After I gave out a quick, "Nice to meet you," the door greeter returned to her post. One thing I forgot to mention, Prego lady also had with her a girl who I presumed to be her daughter. She couldn't have been more than 17 years old, and she comes into play in just a moment. I established the connection from her phone to the kiosk, and Prego opted to view all the pictures on the kiosk itself. She was trying to scroll through all her photos when her daughter took it upon herself to demonstrate how it works. She scrolled all the way to the right. Why did she do it? This woman had various shots of herself, nude, along with some close-ups of her pleasure herself. She quickly scrolled back to the left, and her daughter flashed me an embarrassed smile. I played it off like nothing happened, but all three of us knew it was the most awkward moment any of us would experience for a long time. Story 30. Old lady would bring in a disposable camera about once every 2 weeks. 95 of the pictures were of the TV. She would see something she wanted to buy off of the home shopping network and wanted to remember to get it later. So she took a screenshot. Story 31. I worked at photo labs for years. I started in consumer labs in malls, etc., and moved into commercial, professional labs. The consumer labs was a lot of the same. A lot homemade adult film. The funny stuff was the regulars where you got to see the patterns. We had an older couple that every week brought home adult film of some strapping young stud ducking the wife. On the commercial side, there was a surprising amount of legit housewives and regular women who had erotic photos of themselves made. Lots of pregnancy photos, too. It ranged from really beautiful to poorly produced and trashy. There was a local car dealership lady in the 90s that had tons of stuff shot of her. She had terrible plastic surgery, lots of scars and lumpy lines. We also had some suspect studio photography of girls that could in no way be 18. They got reported and handled accordingly. Also had some squeezy bosses that collected albums. That was uncomfortable. The coolest was at the same lab. We also had a contract for declassified stuff from a government facility that tested rockets, projectiles, reactors, and other fascinating physics-related experiments. I got to print photos of this long before Wikipedia. Story 32. Fun unrelated fact. The digital print kiosks save your photos on the hard drive. We would pull them up on the computer when we got bored. Most of the good stuff was on the kiosks because people thought nobody could see. Best to print your dirty or incriminating pics at home. Story 33. I worked at Walgreens doing photo for about a year. Saw lots of fun stuff. The real story, though. This woman came in with large storage container filled to the top with old rolls of film and disposable cameras. I remember it took me 2 weeks to develop all of it in between the regular jobs that came in each day. We told her it was going to be pretty expensive. She didn't seem to mind. She said she had been saving them her whole life and just now wanted to get them developed. It was crazy. I watched her entire life unfold. It started when she was a teenager and went up until pretty recently. She started looking like her current self towards the end of her photos. I saw her party it up in college, go topless in the hot tub, have what looked like a sex party. I saw her with many men over the years. Many men. I saw her kids grow up too. She had photos of the same guy for a few years, but other guys would pop up here and there. When the photos were finally ready, we called and she came in with this rich-looking guy. He paid the $900 for all of the photos, and we helped lug them out to her car. I was always curious what he thought about all of them. I felt like I had seen this woman grow up. It was weird to see her again when she finally picked up the photos. Story 34. An older couple came in, upper middle-aged. and were being all cuddly, holding hands and embracing while waiting for their photos. I thought, "Aw, that's sweet. That's what I want my relationship to be like in 40 years or so." Got on with my day, served a few customers, went to put their photos in an envelope. Boom, naked lady on a beach. Lady in dominatrix gear reclining on a couch. Looking quite good for her age, in fact. My cheeks got a bit red, but I handed them to her and they left, and I thought, that's definitely what I want my relationship to be like in 40 years or so. And then there was the old guy printing amateur adult photos of a tatted woman for her, because apparently she wants to get into modeling. His opinion was that she had too many tattoos to be a model, but he's being supportive and helping her put her portfolio together anyway. Remembered a good one. The photo itself wasn't too shocking, just a portrait of a young man, but the guy printing it had only one eye. And while I was helping him with the photo kiosks, he told me it was a picture of his son who had been hitting last year and he passed away. When he left with his wife, my coworker said, "You know who that was, right?" Turned out to have been the leader, or high up anyway, of a local gang, whose son was indeed hitting last year, and who passed in the arms of his girlfriend, who happened to be the daughter of a national celebrity. Just last week was the 1-year anniversary of his death, and I saw my one-eyed customer on the news leading his gang on a tribute motorcycle ride in his memory, while they talked about the gang's recent trouble with the law busting them for hard substances and stuff. One-Eye Chris and his wife seemed like really nice people. Story 35. My time to shine. I worked at Kodak Express for just over a year. Not developed the film, but I was helping this woman print photos from her mobile phone via the kiosk. As we were getting towards the end of the photos, a sudden photo surge of big junk came up like 50 in a row. She got so embarrassed and said that sometimes my son uses my phone? Yeah, sure. Story 36. I worked for Walgreens Photo Lab for a couple of years. By far the worst was a series of pictures that this old man came in to get developed. All of them were a close-up of his junk, with a giant keychain, think janitor's keys, tied to a rope hanging off his junk. All of the pictures were of him swinging it around like he was trying to make his junk a clock. Story 37. My mother used to do this. The police would bring film from investigations. You'd see pictures from accidents where someone passed. Story 38. The most famous was an obese couple who had no recollection of the group sex they apparently participated in and photographed via disposable while in Vegas. That was fun explaining why we couldn't sell them the pictures. Story 39. Oh, now I remember a good one. A sweet young woman came in and used the kiosk. She was getting 6 photos, and the photo was a very tall guy, totally nude, just laying on a bed. I printed it out and mentioned to her to be careful with her subject matter next time. It's perfectly legal to print those pictures. However, it made me a little uncomfortable because it was a busy day, and a bunch of people were looking into my little area when she asked me to crop it. And so there are some old women waiting to use the kiosk and waiting for me to be helped. And there I am, with a huge blown-up butt on a bed. The girl told me this was a one-time thing, and that all it was is proof that he cheated on her. So she left, and a few hours later, she showed back up with the guy. And before they entered the store, I'm assuming that's when she decided to show the picture. And next thing everyone in the store hears is an extremely loud scream coming from a guy outside. Turns out he tried to charge the girl, and the girl pulled a Dwight Shoulda and basically emptied a can of pepper spray into his eyes. It was a sight to be seen and a sound to be heard. Story 40. I don't develop film, but I sell mobile phones. One part of any new cell phone purchase is the inevitable contacts. Info transfer from the old phone to the new phone. Pictures transferred are very important for our customers, which is completely understandable. I had this one guy come in and he was having problems with his phone. Phones can be glitchy and sometimes need settings changed, or the customer needs a little more information on how to properly operate their phone. I asked him to tell me a little bit about his problem, and he told me about some issues he was having with the phone's photo gallery. No problem, Mr. Customer. Let's take a look at the app and see if we can find a resolution. Turns out this dude just want me to see his junk. I mean, there were over 2,000 pictures in his gallery, and every thumbnail on every album preview in there was his junk in various states of hardness, painted, dressed up, with things down the pee hole and other weird crap I'm still trying to forget. Realizing I had been duped into looking at this man's junk, I looked up from his phone too, see him with that same ducked-up grin looking at me. He even had the audacity to ask I had liked what I had seen. No. The answer is a resounding no. Told him to get the duck out of the store. And that's just one example of the daily shenanigans in a cell phone store. Story 41. My girlfriend has a pretty good story. She does not use Reddit, so I will share. The other day, she was developing a guy's film. The entire print job was the dude's cat laying on a fancy bed with mood lighting, satin sheets, etc. The cat was posing in a wide variety of positions. Story 42. I worked in a photo lab doing custom enlargements in black and white. Mostly artsy stuff. I had a man come in and ask if I was willing to print stuff for a couple adult mags he shot for. I said sure. Turns out this was not normal adult film. Senior citizens getting it on for the camera. The strangest, I guess, was a guy who came in with a very old large format negative. He said he found it in his grandpa's stuff and we couldn't really tell what it was. I printed it, and it turned out to be a picture from San Francisco right after the 1908 quake. Burning rubble all around, almost no people, except for one shady-looking guy with arms full of stuff. Looked like he was looting. That was my favorite thing I ever printed there. Story 43. 65-years-old neighbor asking me to try to recover pics from a damaged SD card. I'd rather believe that all these junk pics were logically deleted and that he didn't realize I'd recover them as well. I deleted them before handing him the rescued SD card. Story 44. Worked at a one-hour photo store back in 2005. One day, a father came in with his daughter. She was around 10 years old. The father put this really silly-looking penguin-shaped disposable 35mm camera on my desk and asked how quick I could develop the images. I told him to come back in 45 minutes and immediately started developing the pictures. That is the strangest roll of film I've ever had to deal with. First, it was sunny pictures of the whole family in some theme park. Then bam, a low of adult photos. I color-corrected the images as best as I could, of course. The last few images of the roll were back to normal. Pictures of his daughter playing and the happy family together. So everything was finished in time when he came back to pick the images up. That's when it became really strange. He actually opened the envelope at the desk and looked through it all with his curious daughter at his side and several other customers waiting in line. He didn't seem embarrassed at all. He nodded, pay, and went his way. Story 45. My roommate in college worked at a photo lab. This was about 18 years ago. We had a religious neighbor in our apartment complex who lectured us all the time about things we shouldn't be doing. She wasn't a Debbie Downer, really, but more of an elitist about her opinions. One day he comes home with a stack of photos. They're of her BJ and ducking from all angles and hand-jobbing and so on. I couldn't believe it. She was actually fairly attractive, so they were a bit of a pleasure to look at. Today I would be racked with guilt, but back then I was barely 18, so I just looked at them, mouth agape. My roommate just ran off an extra copy of all the pictures. A stack sitting around our apartment for the 3 more months I lived there, all the while listening to her every few days tell us why we should wait for marriage to have sex. It was surreal. She must have had a serious ability to compartmentalize. Story 46. I worked at a camera shop in the early 90s. One of our customers was a detective in the town I lived in and a good friend of my parents. Every few weeks, he would bring in a roll of film from some of his investigations that he would share with me. One time, he was investigating an accident where a car forced a motorcycle off of the road and into a steel support cable for a telephone pole. The guy hit the steel cable right at his neck. After a few pictures of the scene and body, I can still see that picture in my mind to this day. Story 47. Had this young man once come in with a ton of film to develop. They were older pictures because you could tell by the hairstyles, but every few rolls you could see pictures of this older woman performing various sex acts. I was like, crap, this guy is into some kinky crap. He comes pick it up the next day, and I'm like having the biggest grin on my face. As I'm ringing him out, he tells me the story about the rolls of film. His mom just passed, and he wanted to get these developed for the funeral. My smile vanished as I went into full sympathetic mode, and I didn't have the heart to tell him what was he in store for when he looked at those pictures. Story 48. I developed photos for a bit at the grocery store I once worked at. In no particular order, the most shocking things were as follows. A woman with an 8-ball inside of her. A man we nicknamed Chester, as he always had pictures of very obese women covered in various food items. Story 49. My mom developed photos for a chain called Moto Photo back in the early 90s, and she told me she saw all sorts of ducked-up crap. Lawyers would have to get their photos developed for court cases, so she saw close-ups of the aftermath of car wrecks, industrial accidents, etc. She used to be very paranoid about me wearing my seatbelt in the car. After a particularly grisly set of photos she developed depicted a wreck. Story 50. My friend worked Eckerd's in mid-90s in an area that was where a lot of young people lived close to all the cool bars, etc., and he developed tons of crazy stuff. He had 2 girls that were regular customers, who were also Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, and they would drop off multiple rolls of film every week. They would specifically ask for my friend since many places had people back then who would not develop sex. These girls had endless amounts of them in group sex and etc. He used to print extra copies when he could and show us. They were one of many. Since back then, you had no choice unless you developed them at home yourself. Story 51. Not sure if shocking is the right word, but I've had a roll of film of an old person in a nursing home and a few frames later, a hospital bed. Next came pictures of the wake at their funeral. This person was well, got sick, and then passed all in the span of this single roll of film. Mildly disturbing on an existential level, to say the least. Also, what is up with people taking pictures at wakes? Stop that. That's no way to remember your loved ones. Story 52. I once printed of a guy who looked obliterated. His eyes were barely open, and as the photo came out of the processor, you could see his shirt was covered in vomit. As the photo rolled out, you could see he was naked from the waist down. As I watched the photo print, the junk kept coming. For a moment, I thought there was a printing error causing the last part of the photo to stretch. But no, he just had a junk that nearly reached his knees. When his friends picked up the photo, they lost it laughing. Story 53. At my store, we had a woman who would come in and try print all kinds of nudes. But we aren't allowed to sell those kinds of photos. I think she just got off on showing them or something because she came in every so often and was actually banned from a few other stores. Story 54. I worked at Target Photo for a while. Two things stick out in my mind. First, disposable cameras for weddings are usually a terrible idea. People would drop off plastic bags full of them, and very few would ever turn out good. And inevitably, someone would put the camera down their pants. I'm sure the bride and groom want to see your junk on their return from the honeymoon. The other strange picture I saw was in the middle of a very normal roll of film. I was scrolling through and checking the images, and bam, a bathtub full of naked guys, like 9 full-grown naked men. Only one picture. Everything else was just normal. No pictures of the circumstances leading up to the tub. It was odd. Story 55. I worked at a drugstore and big box retailer photo lab from about 2010. I've seen a lot of weird crap. From people doing weird sex acts to just downright stupid people taking pictures of their substances and guns. Story 56. My brother worked at Walgreens and developed the roll of film my mom took at my daughter's birth. This was back in the day when the viewfinder didn't fully display everything that was in the shot. So my mother took a great picture of my daughter being held up by the doctor. When my brother developed the picture, he got my daughter, the doctor, and my pussy in all its post-birth glory. He couldn't look me in the eye for a while. Story 57. The good old days of film. I had a buddy that every time he found an unattended camera, like at a party or someone's house, would grab it, head for the toilet, and take a picture of his junk, just to make the developing really fun. People who used to develop disposable camera films, what's the creepiest or craziest, most memorable photos you ever developed? Working on a cruise ship, developing crew films. Some guy would get film sent from his wife. We would develop a few raunchy shots of the missus in various stages of undress. We assumed tripod and self-timer were involved, but no. In one set of shots, there was a mirror in the background. Their son was taking the photos. Story 2. Not memorable for the photos, but for the whole situation. A guy comes in saying he wants to pick up his photos. So as usual, we take his name and go to the drawer to look for them. Nothing there by that name, I say. Perhaps another name. No, he says. So I asked when he brought the film in to be developed. It was a disposable camera, says the guy. I say, okay, so when did you bring in the camera to be developed? It was a disposable camera, he says. After a bit of towing and froing, turns out he took the term disposable camera literally. So threw it in the bin right after using it. When I asked him how he expected the photos to get to us from the bin, he said, I don't know, satellites or something? Damn. Story 3. I develop film right now. We got my favorite thing recently. So when you look through a roll, you get some idea of a story. We got one roll recently. Vacation, shots of the various landmarks, and so on. Then guy snorting substances in his hotel room. Then 3 shots later. It's him in his underwear, in that same hotel room, holding a goat's. The flash was on too, so the goat's eyes are glowing. No context, nothing. I love it. Story 4. Used to develop film from a prison, they'd give the inmates disposable cameras for some reason. I think they were instructed to take pictures of their friends, so the inmates would reveal who's in what gang. I don't know. Anywho, between pictures of dudes making gang signs and posing in groups, there would be pictures of finger paintings, which I thought was kind of sweet. Story 5. When I was about 17 years old, I worked for CVs as a photo tech. I once had a roll that was a series of trophy pictures of naked women laying all in the same bed. Some of them happened to be under 18 years old as I went to high school with them. I told my manager she needed to take a look at this, and she said when the guy came in that she wanted to talk to him. I called him, told him his rolls were all set, and when he came in, she had cops waiting for him. Crap was crazy. Story 6. I worked at a camera store in my high schools and college days, and we had a photo lab in the back. It was a college town, and so there were plenty of photos of young adults exploring their hot, etc. I never saw anything that I considered inappropriate, CP or anything like that. We did have a cardboard cover for the machine output hopper so that people wouldn't see any photos of nudity and get upset. However, the most memorable images I remember printing were from 1989, from the Tiananmen Square riots. You know, the man holding up the line of tanks, the tank man. It was a big deal in world at that time, and especially in college towns for a few reasons. First, the protesters were mostly college-age Chinese. Second, there were a lot of Chinese grad students on campuses in the US, and they felt deeply impacted by this. Many new people protesting in China. We had students coming into the store with photos they took off the TV screen so they could reproduce them in the hundreds to send back to China to circumvent the regime's oppressive control of the media. I'll never forget those events, and the students' desire to do their part, even through they were the world away. We gave them massive discounts on the orders, too. Story 7. So my aunt has a picture of her and her kids in front of their farmhouse. Unfortunately, she accidentally superimposed the picture of her mother-in-law in her funeral casket, so she was hovering in the sky above her grandchildren. My cousin called it Grandma Levitating, and my aunt had it in her house for years. Story 8. I worked at a retail store that you could pick up your packs of photos from a large bin. Occasionally, there would be a torn pack, and a couple photos would fall out between the inventory truck and the customer pickup bin. One such time, it was the photo index card that I found on the ground. Picked it up and looked at it, showed a sequence of pictures, some grandma's birthday party, kids playing, the mom naked, the mom and dude having sex, random family gathering and portraits, and then a Thanksgiving. Story 9. All right, I had a summer job developing photos, among other tasks, at a major American pharmacy retail chain about 10 years ago. The photo development process itself was fairly uncomplicated as a machine automated most of the work. I would load the 35mm roll into the compartment, seal it in, select a few settings, and the pictures would pop out in a few minutes. The store wasn't usually very busy, so sometimes I'd look through people's photos. There were the usual assortment of family trips, bar mitzvahs, graduations, awkward selfies, photo duck-ups of people's feet, and blurred walls. Story 10. Never worked with physical film other than to box it up to ship to Fujifilm, but a good part of my job right now is printing people's photo orders. Most of it is pretty boring and typical, occasional hot selfies, or the guy with the fetish. Story 11. Back in high school, I worked at a photo lab. I come in one day, grab a roll, and start doing my thing, just like I did every day. The first roll I grabbed had the most convincing UFO pictures I had ever seen, and even 2 or 3 with what appeared to be an alien in a field. Again, like nothing I've ever seen. No sci-fi can compete with what I saw in those few pictures. Not 5 minutes later, a man walks in asking for the photos I just developed. I hand them to him and he leans in real serious and asks me, "Did you look at them?" I jokingly said, "Sir, I don't have time to look at half the pictures we develop." Then he paid me and left. Story 12. I worked at a 1-hour place that developed film back in the late 90s OS. This was pre-digital, and we hand-corrected each pic for color and exposure. It's way less intense than it sounds. So we saw everything. They also didn't take out the nudes and refused to develop them, like some places. Common things I saw. 1. So many junk pics. So many. The funniest one was a guy in those smiley face Joe boxers, black silk with a red face. 2. Naked women. 3. Sex. Some of the odder, sad, creepy stuff I saw. 1. We had a client who always brought rolls of what looked like mediocre quality nude model pics. Not the girls, but the photographic quality. They were on a basic, white background. They were the formulaic poses. And the girls didn't look particularly stoked to be there. One day, he brings 3 rolls in and we get to developing. It's myself and my friend in the shop at the time and I was on the printer. The 3 rolls were of 2 women, a bunch of individual pics, and some together. Their demeanor seemed to go downhill as their state of undress increased, smiling to sad to almost blank. I got a bad feeling and showed my friend. She said she'd developed some of the others the previous day that looked off too. Luckily, he hadn't picked them up when he dropped these off. The girls looked high. We immediately called the cops. It was a 1-hour job. Luckily, they got there before he did. 2. A woman would always bring in pics of her terminally ill daughter enjoying life, trips to Disney and other exotic locales, birthday party, half-birthday party, etc. One day, she came in and told us the girl had passed. She hands us 2 rolls and says these are the last she has of her girl. We were all sad because we'd sort of gotten to know her through her smile in the pictures. Well, the last 2 rolls were of this girl in her casket, and people from the funeral posing with her. Okay, I get it. Some people need to document things to heal. No judgment. When it came time for her to send out thank you cards to people for supporting them, she came in for 200 reprints of a picture of her daughter, smiling on one of her trips, at the birthday party, with her siblings. Nope, in the casket. It broke my heart. Story 13. Friend used to work in a photo lab in high school. The father of one of our mutual friends passed out due to a medical issue while in his car in the driveway. Car caught fire. He never made it out. Local police took photos of the body and my friend developed them. It wasn't until after his shift what he realized who the body was. Story 14. When I was in the Navy, I had a disposable camera. Now submariners are crazy, so I left the camera in the sonar shack. Well, when we pulled into port, I sent the camera off to my wife to develop. She told me that they wouldn't develop all the pictures. My shipmates had taken a bunch of pictures of their junk. Story 15. I worked on a photo desk in a supermarket for 3 years. The craziest one I ever had was when a guy asked to print off his wedding pictures from his phone. Didn't realize he'd selected everything on there to be printed, and ended up with a bunch of printouts of him getting it on with another guy just before the wedding. Story 16. Back in the early 90s, our grocery store developed film. One pic made no sense in the negative, but when printed produced a point-of-view shot of a guy ducking a handbag. You could see all the miscellaneous purse contents around the junk. Story 17. I worked when they had a bright idea to introduce disposable camcorders. Developed couple's wedding photos. They put out a bunch of disposable cameras for the guests, multiple junk pics. Then I ran their honeymoon pictures and lots of her naked. They came in to pick up and were talking about the resort and said they let peacocks just roam around. Without thinking, I said, "Oh yeah, saw that looked kinda neat." That's when they realized that I looked at their pictures. You have to click the button on the machine for each picture. Kinda got quiet after that. Story 18. I haven't personally experienced anything weird, other than seeing about half of a junk in one pic. My lab manager has told me, though, that he's seen some weird crap in his day. One time, he had a fairly large woman develop some photos, which included shots of her in lingerie. After the photos were developed and handed to her, the woman asks my manager, in a kind of embarrassed voice, "Did you see any of the photos?" After saying he did, she leaned in a little close and whispered, "Did you like them?" I think I remember him saying, too, that he once found someone trying to develop what was essentially CP. My manager informed the customer that he had called the police. Story 19. Along the same lines, I worked for a company that had a photo printing site that did photo books and gifts. Some of the more memorable photos I recall going through the system. A topless elderly woman with her naked boobs resting on the keys of a piano. The infamous poop book. A client must have had some sort of fecal fetish, as he created a photo book comprised of various images of his poop. The book culminated in a toilet selfie. It looked like the camera was placed inside the toilet bowl, as you could see the rim of the seat and everything, and the guy was standing over the toilet. He ordered about 10 copies too, assumedly for his other fecal fetish friends. Story 20. We would have the 70-something-year-old lady come in around once a month to develop her pictures. Every time it was the same thing haunts me to this day. It was her in a see-through, pink silk robe with pink's fuzzy bits around the edges, pleasure herself, just picture after picture. Story 21. I worked at a photo lab for 3 years back in the 90s, and I have some pretty good ones. Most of the photos that people tried to take that were NSFW were terrible. They would usually buy one of the crappy disposable cameras without a flash, and take the pictures in a poorly lit bedroom where the pictures would come out terribly. I did have one high school friend privately ask me to develop photos of her for her boyfriend. They were very tame, but it was weird seeing her with stuffed animals strategically placed over her body. As you can imagine, whenever there were risque pictures, we all wanted to see. So it was a bit of a sideshow when they came in. It wasn't often, but it did happen. There were even a couple of times where we had to decide not to print them based on what we saw in the negatives. Nothing creepy, but usually too explicit to develop in our lab. The conversation with the customer was always a bit awkward, but if they had the courage to drop the pictures off, they were usually prepared to get that information in private. My best story was from about 1996 or so. I worked at a photo lab in Fort Worth, TX, very close to the TCU campus and near the Colonial Golf Course. One day in the spring, a guy came in with about 50 rolls of film and wanted them developed immediately. He wasn't rude, but he was in a huge hurry. We weren't cheap, but he didn't care. Turns out there was a dude named Tiger Woods playing the Colonial Golf Tournament, and every single picture, 36 exposure rolls, was of Tiger. He was getting them developed so he could rush back and sell them. We got the film developed as quickly as possible and back to him, and he was gone. I sincerely regret not making a few extra copies for myself, which would have been against the rules, but I should have done it. The creepiest thing was finding out that the guy who worked with me was printing doubles of anything that was out of the norm, and had them all in photo albums in his apartment. I was shocked to see that he had about 40 photo albums, full of our customers' photos in his own private collection. Creeped me out a little. Story 22. My brother worked in a photo lab in upstate New York back in the late 80s and early 90s. Since it was just down the street from me, I'd often visit. One day he tells me about this old guy who came in. Said he had some film he never processed from the early days of the war. Black and white film can hold an exposure for a ridiculously long time in the right conditions. So the lab agrees to try and develops them. And guess what? The images came out great. Though, of course, upon closer inspection, my brother realized the shots were of the old dude and his friends way back when, in uniform. Story 23. Here's the craziest thing that ever happened to me, and it involves something so huge I could have been either hit or on the front page of every international newspaper, or both. So I worked at my local ASDA, and I was 18 years old at the time. I'd been recently trained on the photo department, and it was around my second month working there. It was fairly easy. We had the strange regulars, a woman who came in weekly to get her disposable camera's film roll developed that all featured her adult daughter in hot underwear. We presumed that her daughter was asking her to develop the photos and that she probably didn't know what was on them, or at least, we hoped. And then the rest were just holiday photos and the like. Then one day, some shifty Polish man comes to the counter. He hands me his disposable camera and nervously asks for the 1-hour service. Sure, it's pretty quiet, and I was just playing solitaire on the Windows 98 computer sandwiched between machinery here. I take the film out, do the necessary developing, and then the photos get sent through to said computer, so I can crop, edit, rotate them, so they come out as best as possible. I had no idea how to do any of that, so I would just quickly glance through and then send it to print. We had to glance through them, because we weren't allowed to print copyrighted photos, hot photos, etc. And this guy's photos terrified me. My heart instantly sank because I knew then and there that if what I was looking at was real, then I was going to be on the front of every single newspaper for the next 3 weeks. I sent them to print so I could show the security guard. I was on my own, and I had no idea where the manager was, in fact. I don't think my manager was even in. I took the photos over to the security guard and asked him what to do. He thanked me for showing him and called the police. The police came, and both the 2 officers and the security guard instructed me on what to do. We would wait for the man to return to pick up the photos. Then I would signal over to the police officers, who would be casually hiding at the security desk, not entirely out of sight really, so they could run over and arrest him. Damn, man. I'm just a minimum wage guy who wants to make films and watch films. I'm not a damn secret agent, but this is what I was being instructed to do. I waited anxiously for the guy's name to pop up. You see, I forget what people look like. I see so many customers each day that they're all a blur to me. Often, when I worked on the shop floor, a customer would approach me asking to check for something in the back. I'd go in the back, check, and then think, damn, what did they look like? And that happened way too many times to count. So I was waiting on that name, and then a guy came. Different guy, but shifty. I only had 2 or 3 other orders to collect. It was a quiet, slow day. Was this the guy? He says the name. It's him. This is the moment. He's seen my face and will know in a few moments that I brought down his entire operation. What do? I looked over to the police officers as I walked behind me to retrieve the photos, but the duckers had their backs to me. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I couldn't wave or shout. Our criminal would be alerted and he'd definitely leg it. Who knows what he has on his person? I retrieved the photos and walked back to the guy. Time was in slow motion. The security desk was to the right of me, by the entrance, and they just weren't looking at all. This is not what spy films are like. I thought they were all intense, but here I was, cluelessly carrying the weight of my mission on my hazard-blinking eyes, hoping the police would notice. The guy asks why there are police around. Oh crap, he's going to beat me right here, isn't he? I think someone stole something, I don't know, it happens all the time, I blurted out. The guy chuckled anxiously and turned away. He's walking to the door. My time to shine. I jumped up and down waving, the police noticed. I pointed to the guy. The police grabbed the guy and they arrested him. What were on the photos? Just a big group of shirtless guys in balaclavas holding assault rifles in what looked like some sort of sewers. Yeah, a terrorist operation. Right under my belt. They were serious business. There were a lot of guns and a lot of guys. This was not fun and games. Until a week later, when I find out that it was actually just a Polish stag do, and that a raid of their house turned up nothing but BB guns. So I have flown close to the son of secret agency, but alas, it was just another reminder that I'm lonely and others are getting married. Story 24. I worked at the National Drug Store, photo place, about 10 years back. Seen it all. The best one by far was Grandma and her grandson's first camera. I'm guessing he was between 8 years old. I believe it was disposable, and for sure it also had the ability to do panoramic shots. This little man took all kinds of pictures. I was really impressed. We're talking toys, dinner, inside, outside. He's going to be a photographer, no doubt. He even set up a bunch of the army figurines on the couch and table in a war, and took pictures of the battle in action. Really cool stuff. Imagine my surprise when I get to one of the panoramic shots. A giant turd in the toilet? Like for real? Nice long one too, the kind that wouldn't go down without breaking in half. Best part, the panoramic shots won't even fit in the envelope. So now I'm holding this envelope with a panoramic shot of half a turd sticking out of it in the claims bin. I figure best thing to do is put the turd picture in the back and reverse the pictures so the backs are facing front. An hour or so later, of course, GMA returns with her little boy. At the counter, I give her the pack and, as they are paying, of course they open the pack to look. She's looking and being a supportive grandma. Ooh, so nice. Ooh, I like this when you took it. And the kid is so happy. Finally, she gets to the panoramic turd. At this point, I can barely contain myself. She looks and goes, "Oh, wow, that's you?" Her little man looks up with the proudest eyes I ever seen a grandson have ever, and says, "I made that. Yes, you did, little man. And it was a good one too," is what I should have said. Instead, I probably said something like, "That'll be 9.95 comma, do you have your membership card today?" I seen a lot of crap at that job. Nasty pics, funny pics, hot pics, and a bazillion pics of the same old boring waterfall down the street from my job. But only once in my life have I ever seen a panoramic turd, and I will never forget it. Story 25. I worked at a mini lab and have seen graphic photos, from car accidents to all kinds of sex acts. It was challenging when customers would ask for redos of nasty pics to color correct for better skin tones. My favorite role was from a piano company. My coworker pointed out that there were no pianos in the photos, but there sure was a lot of flute playing. Story 26. Back in the 80s, I worked in a sketchy, independent one-hour photo shop hidden in the back of a small mall. It was a magnet for people to bring in their private photos. So much fur. I don't remember a single day when we didn't get in a roll of film with genitalia. We were under orders from the boss and manager to immediately make doubles or triples of the good stuff, and there was a lot of that. We had an entire cupboard filled with photo albums of furry people, yay 80, doing fun stuff. After a while, you got used to seeing sex, so for the most part, it was pretty ordinary. The only times it got odd was when the manager would bring in his own rolls for processing. It was a bit jarring. The first few times I printed up pictures of him and his girlfriend, who also worked there, being very hot in front of the camera. Story 27. When I was moving out for college, I found one from a family beach trip from when I was 11. It was like 15 precinct pictures of crabs, 20 precinct pictures of a dog, and 65 precinct hot women doing beach stuff. I knew I was kind of a creepy kid, but these were some real creep shots. I threw them away immediately. Story 28. Many years back when I was a young teenager, I worked at the local Walmart. One of the cute girls working in the photo lab saved me a couple nudie photos. They print them, but weren't allowed to give them to the customers, so they usually just got tossed in the garbage. Later on that evening, I was gloating over my ill-gotten gains with my buddy, and he does a double take at one of the pics and starts losing his crap because it was his sister. I'd managed to get a picture of his hot sister. Story 29. Worked at CV's a few years back. We still developed film. Two guys stick out to me. One was this old dude who came in once a month. He would have pictures of old lady butts out in public, like just random old lady butts in Walmart or the mall. Then he would have pictures of random houses on the same roll of film. It seemed very stalkerish. Eventually, we reported it to the police, but I assume nothing came of it because he still came in once a month with the same stuff. I never saw it, but some of the employees who had been there for years said one time he had pictures developed that had cutouts of his junk glued on girls in magazines. The other time was these dudes in their mid-20s brought in some film from their vacation. It was full of pictures of substances. I only developed the legal pictures and told them that we didn't develop pictures of illegal activity, gave them the negatives, and suggested they buy a digital camera or use the iPhone they had in their hands. Story 30. Another incident I had working at Kodak was I had to help at the self-printing kiosks when digital photos were becoming bigger and bigger. Now these machines had privacy curtains so no one could see what you printed. I was 17 at this stage, and one day, so a girl around 18 came and nervously went into one and printed her photos. These are completely self-service machines that took payment as well. The thing is that these machines also give a loud beep. If after you print and paid, you left some photos in printout section, see, this poor girl was so nervous, she must not have waited for them all to print and left the store in a hurry. The machine started to beep, so I went to grab the images and put them behind the counter just in case she came back. When I went inside the machine, this girl had printed some very nice nude self-portraits there. Were like 5 images left in there, so I grabbed them and put them behind the counter. Like 2 minutes later, I see the girl walk back and look around in the machine. She nervously walked up to a female coworker who informed her I look after the machines. The girl then went back into the machine to print more photos. She then walked over to me and asked if I had her other photos, so I handed them to her. She then handed me photos she just printed and said, "Number is on the back, but these are yours. Don't tell anyone I was here." She left, and I opened the package to find she had printed the whole collection, about 30 photos. For me, she was hot, but for a while couldn't figure out why she gave them to me. Didn't ring the number as I had a girlfriend at this stage. Story 31. Worked at Fry's Electronics many years ago, and people would bring in their busted laptops or broken external hard drives and want us to do data recovery. As you can imagine, I saw a lot of naked pictures of mostly attractive people, but sometimes not so attractive people. There are 3 situations that stick out. 1, a father and son come in with a busted laptop and say the data on it must be recovered due to an upcoming court case. The son had been having a relationship with his teacher and had managed to take photographs and video and needed them as proof for the court case. 2, a very attractive blonde comes in and says she needs the data recovered from her corrupted laptop due to it being important and business-related. Turns out she started an adult site. Story 32. I used to shoot a lot of film when I was in college. There was a community studio and photo lab. An acquaintance of mine was in the next studio over and had a hot model. They closed the partition, which is very common, and shot away. I saw the guy the next day and asked how his shoot went. Handed me a wonderful, artistic, black and white print of a pussy. Perfect lighting, perfect printing. I still have it somewhere. Story 33. I have an old college buddy several states away that used to work for Walmart and develop pictures there. He told me of 2 stories. The first being about a guy that had a role developed when he visited the Sturgis motorcycle rally. Going through, and there's typical stuff: bikes, chicks, bars. Then all of a sudden, the rest of the role is just this dude, the camera's owner, blowing an entire biker gang. Apparently one of the bikers picked up the camera and started taking photos. The second was a woman who was developing pictures of me. Remember, this is states away, so my friend, upon recognizing me in the pictures, got worried. All these shots of me just standing around talking. He finally mustered up the courage to ask her about the photos, and she told him about a great tour she had in the Black Hills and her lovely tour guide, which was me. He was less worried after that. I was pretty blown away by the coincidence, however. Story 34. A couple of good ones come to mind. Me and my lab partner are running a busy photo lab with about a dozen customers standing around waiting for their 1-hour film developing when a 20-something walks up and loudly proclaims that he just got his junk pierced and wanted to know if we can develop the pictures he took. Sure enough, my coworker yells back, "That's nothing. We've seen it all, and yeah, we'll develop those for you." I never saw so many women walk away at one time before. We used to have another customer that looked like your normal 60 average grandpa, except this grandpa had a fetish for junk rings, and when he could afford one, escort. At least twice a week, we would get a throwaway camera that contained pictures of him pleasure himself while taking pictures of himself. He had quite a large junk ring collection in a multitude of colors. Story 35. I worked at a pharmacy on a major collage campus for a couple of years, and I saw plenty of strange stuff. When film got brought to us or digital orders came in, you gave them a quick scan through for CP or other banned pictures, which only came up once. I saw a fair share of pictures of people who were drunk and crap or puked all over themselves, which, while funny the first time you see it, after a while it got old. Story 36. Used to work in a photo lab. The worst was the older, wrinkly, naked, unattractive people. I can remember at least 5 separate occasions where there was full frontal nudity involved, but it was never people you'd be excited to see. Our lab had a policy not to actually print nude photos, so we had to exclude those from the printing process and include a little note in their order explaining why some of their photos were missing. Story 37. I used to work in a 1-hour lab for years. This store was in a kind of bad area. We had a regular customer. He never developed photos, but would come in for smokes or beer a lot. He seemed to be a street person, or at least a trashy person who ran with the street people. I often recognized him walking in the neighborhood. One day, he came in with a disposable camera to develop. The photos were of really gross spread eagle shots of a few women laying in a motel room bed, also a couple of the man fully nude. I noticed the man had a long, pronounced scar down the center of his chest. Anyway, a few days later, I noticed the man had apparently gotten a job to dress up in a giant coin costume to kind of dance on the side of the road to promote tax refunds at a local tax business. I just thought it was so bizarre and funny, knowing what this giant dancing coin looked like naked. Also worked a different nicer store in a nicer neighborhood. One elderly lady had her Christmas card photos done of herself standing nude with only a wreath she held up covering her breasts. Pretty funny, considering they were to be sent out as her Christmas cards. Same store. Was located in a small city that was actually in a much larger city. Story 38. Probably going to get buried, but what the hell. This guy was a regular at my work. He was a respectable doctor that usually came in with his wife or his 3 preteen daughters. He came in with one of his daughters, dropped off a roll, and shopped while we developed it. It started out fine. A few business photos taken in his office, then a few of his nurses, then one nurse topless, then 2 nurses topless, then nurses kissing, then him kissing the nurses. It was fun handing the envelope over to his daughter while keeping eye contact with him. Story 39. I worked at the Walmart photo lab for a few years when they still developed film on site. For years, there was a man named Biff who did drywall and always came in with pictures of houses he was working on. For reference, Biff looked, and I imagine smelled, just like Iggy Pop. One day, right before I go on lunch, Biff comes in and drops a roll-off. I take his order and run the film through the machine and leave the printing to my partner. So when I come back from lunch, my partner is holding a piece of paper over the computer screen and hitting the skip button over and over. I ask her what the deal is, and she replies, "Whatever you do, don't look at Biff's pictures. I'm going to lunch." Challenge accepted. I will regret this decision for the rest of my days of my life. Half of the pictures were the normal drywall stuff. The second half were photos documenting the process of ducking. What I can only imagine was an old escort this image would stick with me for the remainder of my time on this wretched earth. Poor Biff didn't realize he gave me the wrong camera and was horrified when I told him there were pictures I wasn't allowed to develop on the camera. Never saw him again. Story 40. Worked in a photo lab for quite a while in my late teens. I had a very nice middle-aged lady very excited about developing her film. She had it stored somewhere and forgot about it. Turns out it had some very exposing shots of her, and I had to go through each one. Some were so poor you couldn't make anything out, and one had her naked in a barn spread. Regardless, she paid for the photos, and I never saw her again. I would imagine embarrassed about those photos. I also developed photos for a young girl who wanted to be a model. Needless to say, several nude photos for whatever reason, and she was so excited to see those first. I hope her career went off well, but I feel like she was scammed for nudes. Story 41. I used to work at CVs. I think a lot of customers don't realize we see every photo when developing film. This older couple, who usually just gave me disposable cameras full of grandparent pics, grandkids, cruises, church functions, and so on. They come in and the wife gets sex up a little bit and they give me a camera and stress they need triples. She was in a car accident and it's for insurance court. I tell them not to worry, only charge them for singles. I prepare myself for some semi-difficult pictures. No one wants to see someone's grandmother covered in bruises. I get about halfway through the roll and suddenly it moves from car accident photos to nudes of both of them. Some with whipped cream saw the gentleman's junk. The last photo was the two of them smiling in front of a bathroom mirror. The women bent over, and I'm assuming they were getting business done. Mind you, she's bruised from the accident in all these photos. Needless to say, when they came to pick up their order, I placed the NSFW photos in a separate envelope. Story 42. Not a developer, but when my class went to outdoor school, one of the items listed to bring was a disposable camera, so students could remember the good times. Somehow, one of the girls' cabins got a hold of one of the guy's camera. Apparently, lots of girls liked the guy at the time, and took pictures inside their pants in the bathroom. Not like they purposely took nudes or anything, just stuck the camera in their pants and snapped photos. I guess there were a handful of photos like that, which his mom thought was a result of him covering the flash. All but one photo was impossible to make out. Just dark photos with weird blurs. Story 43. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, and my mom used to get photos developed at the Walmart or CVS or whatever, nowhere special. I remember distinctly that a week or two after the 11th of September, we got a package of our photos returned. Interspersed within pictures of my grandparents, brothers, toddler me in my underwear, and other standard fare, there was an eyewitness photograph from the Pentagon immediately after it was hit. I have no idea whether or not my parents still have the photo. Just one photo, sitting within normal family stuff. Maybe a great metaphor for the mental impact of the 11th of September on the American psyche, yada yada yada. Story 44. I used to work at a store that had a photo department. I was 16 years old. While at a party one night, I took my Jeep on the back porch and got some head. Someone at the party held a camera around the corner of the house and snapped a pic. Didn't really bother either of us at the time, but doesn't the idiot who owned the camera bring it in while I'm working and ask for the pictures back in an hour? Luckily, the lady working in that department was cool, so I told what was about to come out of the printer. She made me a couple copies of a perfect side shot of me pleasure. Story 45. I work at a store, no details, that has a photo development section. A lady came asking for her photos, and I couldn't find them anywhere, so I check in the system and see her name. So I decide to reprint them. In order to print them, I need to open a page on the computer that showed all of her pictures, and when I looked, it was all naked pictures. This lady was getting naked pictures of herself printed out at a store where some employee will have to see them. After I printed them out, she smiled and winked and walked away. Incredibly awkward. Story 46. Worked on lots of photos. There was always lots of nudity, but two stories stick out. Hooray, I can contribute. Once I was developing a role that was clearly from an older couple's camping trip. They had photos of setting up the camper and fishing and playing poker with other elderly friends. Then bam, 80-year-old woman's pussy. Up close and personal. The next thing is less funny and more frightening. I was a manager at this point, and one of my employees, a very chill, no-drama guy, came up to me super quiet and said, "Hey, there is some messed up stuff on those pictures. Right away, I know something is not right." So I go and check them out myself. What disturbed my employee and myself was the pictures were women's that in very graphic positions. Story 47. Worked at a grocery shop developing photos in the early 2000s. Developed a roll which had a bunch of pics of a massive grow-up. When the older lady came in to collect, I asked her about her hedge clipping business. She didn't realize her son had taken some of the photos. I told it was cool. I was a smoker too. She gave me her number and I ended up becoming a customer of hers. Story 48. I worked in a film lab for all of 2 months. The weirdest role I ever got was of this old couple's poop. The husband took close-up pictures of his wife crapping on the lawn to the point you could see is coming out of her and what she had for dinner the night before. It was corn. Story 49. I used to work in a Target photo lab. There were a lot of people with disposable cameras from parties where people appeared in various forms of undress. Once, a hunter brought in pictures of a hunting trip and subsequent butchering of a deer. Not that crazy. My personal favorite was a picture from a camping trip. These campers had built a wooden forest toilet. Imagine an outhouse in the middle of a beautiful forest, but without any walls. The picture was just this guy sitting on the toilet, presumably taking a crap, completely unaware of the photographer. He was totally at peace. It was beautiful. Story 50. I used to buy used rolls of film and disposable cameras from thrift stores, then have them developed just to see what was on them. The very first time I did this, I got a roll of film where a group of students went to Daytona and smoked a bunch of substances. I know because they took lots of pics. I still have most of the photos, but I'm not sure I have them uploaded anywhere. One of them is framed in my living room right now, but not one of the nudes. Story 51. I used to work in the photo department at a popular substance store where people could drop off their disposable cameras and we would develop the film. There was also the option to send in a digital order for us to print. One evening, I received an order with the name Junk Johnson attached to it. I pull up the order to preview the images, and they were all pictures of a man due BJ. At this point, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to even print these out. I call my manager over to photo. We both have a good laugh, and he says that we can in fact print them since there was nothing illegal going on in the photos. Story 52. I have two stories that come to mind. I developed a bunch of pictures of an elderly woman's turds in a toilet. She said that Mayo told her they wanted to look at some stool samples. The other time, a soccer mom dropped off a bunch of disposables on my shift. I get to processing them, and most of them are of some little snot-nosed kid's birthday party. One roll, however, was different than the rest. Completely different scenery, including some kind of nasty people in various stages of undress. So an hour later, the soccer mom comes back and starts going through the pictures. While she is going through them, I'm ringing out regular customers, and there's a bunch of people in line next to her. I hear her say something like, I don't know any of these, and she promptly starts fumbling around and dropping these pictures all over the counter. She was embarrassed, but was a pretty good sport about everyone laughing at her. Story 53. Back in high school, I worked at a camera store. One day, a lady came in with a couple of rolls that she said she had found in the top of her closet and she couldn't remember what was on them. I was fortunate enough to be the developer of the pictures of the two different threesomes on the rolls. One was her and another woman and man. The other was her, the same man plus a new guy. When she arrived and opened the pictures, she quickly closed them again and asked me if we had seen the pictures. I told her no, we did, that it is an automatic process. It isn't. I wasn't prepared for her to seem disappointed by my answer. Yes, she was hot. Obviously a trophy wife. Yes, the other woman was hot as well. No, I don't have an opinion on the men involved. Story 54. Not me, but a friend of mine used to work in a photo hut back in the 70s, which were basically kiosks set in a mall parking lots, where people would drop off film then pick up their pics in a few days. Company policy was you did not have to pay for, or even take home any pictures you didn't like. Now, as you probably know, if you take a flash picture of a dog from a direct angle, their eyes will reflect the light back at you, so that in the picture, they appear to be shooting lasers at you from their eyeballs. Hardly anybody wanted their laser eye dog pics, so my friend would keep them. Eventually, he had several 3-ring binder photo albums of dogs that looked like they were hounds, blasting reflective laser beams at you from the confines of nice suburban homes. It was pretty hilarious if you were high enough, and we usually were by the time we dragged the albums out. Story 55. I work in a photo lab now. One of our most memorable is a lady that would come in and have pictures developed for her boyfriend in prison. It would start out as like an aerial shot of a manhole cover like on a street and get closer and closer to it. Then it would be a shot right above the cover, and then the next photo was close-up pictures of her pussy. The thing was, we can't give out these photos to customers, so I had the pleasure every week of having to have that awkward conversation of, "Sorry, ma'am, I can't sell you pictures of your pussy." We also had really weird family photos come through of the typical mom, dad, and children. We check all photos just in case of any weird stuff trying to go through. All photos seemed to be normal. Then one random photo had the mom in the picture in lingerie. No context at all. Family still dressed normally and looking spiffy, and the mom over there just wearing a bra and panties. Like, what the heck are you really going to hang this up? I work at Walmart, by the way, so crap's always weird. Story 56. I worked at a Photoshop lab throughout high school. Beyond the typical adult nudes, we had a few interesting things come up. CP, we reported it, and apparently, I handed this off to the owners, and they handled it from there. The customer was arrested upon pickup. Pictures of people with a large handgun laid on top of it, along with other posing with the gun. CPS was called, though the owner of the shop handled it from there. Those are the only two things I can think of. Props to the shop owner, though. They had emergency numbers hung in the photo review area where we'd check them for quality, etc., including CPS and state authorities' non-emergency numbers. Along with that, there were special envelopes that were to be used for questionable photos. Story 57. When I was young, maybe 10-ish, I used to clean my dad's office after hours. He would drive me there and catch up on emails while I vacuumed, emptied trash, etc. I would also spend time doing a little snooping through his employees' crap. This one guy had a collection of Polaroids hidden in a desk drawer. They were all of nude or half-nude women with small blots of lotion all over their chest, shoulders, and sometimes face. I remember thinking at the time, what is the deal with the lotion pictures? About 2 years later, I immersed myself into internet adult film, and I finally understood the lotion pictures. Edit. After reviewing the title, this doesn't really belong, but I will leave it here anyways. Story 58. I used to develop film for some of my friends when I worked at an instant developing station. One of my friends gave me a roll, and she had a few upskirt and undershirt pics. They weren't in great focus, but still, really attractive girl too. Also occasional hot pics, but nothing disgusting. Oh, and a trucker used to bring in pics of awesome scenery. Always told me to look at them, and it was like being on the road with him. In the middle of one roll was just a picture of a woman driving next to him, holding her naked breasts in her hands. Story 59. Some old lady used to send in lots of film with nude photos of herself. Another person would sit and take photos of their TV with a digital camera and then print out every single photo. His photo orders were usually in the hundreds of dollars. This would occur 5 times a month, and the photos were like a young took them. Story 60. I don't develop film, but I do have a funny story to share. My grandmother would take a ton of pictures and get them developed at Walgreens once every few weeks. I had just met a guy on Tinder who went to the same college as me, and we were talking for maybe a week, and one day he sent me several pictures of my Christmas at my grandma's house. I was scared crapless. I thought this guy was stalking me. Come to find out, he worked at Walgreens and had been developing pics for my grandma long before I knew who he was and recognized me in some of them. People who used to develop photos for complete strangers as a job? What was the weirdest photo you developed? I currently work in a photo lab at a regional superstore, rivaling Walmart. I get a lot of weird stuff and people, but the one that sticks out is this old couple who visit once a month or so. They like to print out pictures of cheerleaders and ring girls that they take off the TV. They sit there with their crafty $30 smartphone camera taking pictures of any hot girl on the TV, then complain when it prints out in crafty quality and never end up buying them. Last time he was he tried covering for himself by saying he was at the venue, and the manager said to have at it with the girls. Take as many pictures as you like. But again, it's still very clearly the TV. It's a weird process my coworkers and I go through. Story 2. I think people forget that whoever is developing them will see the pictures. I had some of a woman taking them with less and less clothes on, obviously to give to someone. Also a man stark naked lying starfish on a bed. Story 3. When I was really young, my sister and I took naked pictures of ourselves for the Z on a disposable camera. Then my unknowing dad went to the supermarket to get the pictures developed for us. Looking back, I'm surprised he wasn't arrested. Story 4. Weird is all about perspective. I managed a supermarket mini lab 20 years ago when 35mm was still king. I loved it. One that stands out was a series from an art student. There was a 1950s subversive series of quiet desperation. She did black and whites, dressed in a vintage housewife outfit complete with the hairstyle, and had her head in the oven to mimic end. Story 5. Not me, but my buddy worked as a photo tech the summer before we left for college. He said about once every 2 weeks this guy would come in and get photos developed of Taco Bell products, like really nicely arranged on his dining room table. Story 6. The Trolley Man. Once a week, a middle-aged man would come in to have the photos on his SD card digitally printed. It was always photos of out-of-commission train cars. Anywhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 photos each week of different trolleys. Figured it was a hobby of his that he enjoyed, but to drop $50 weekly on photos of trains stuck me as odd. To each their own, though. Story 7. Adult film. The film itself was some weird film canister I've never seen, but was still able to do the same process to develop the film. I looked through each photo to make sure I didn't duck up the process since it was a different canister. It was just 2 women posing in nude in different poses. Developed the photos, but also had to tell my boss. He had to print out a form that the customer had to sign saying they weren't allowed to come back to this specific store. Also happened a second time. This time it was a homeless couple who were taking nude photos in an alley with other homeless pictures. The homeless couple one was truly disturbing. Story 8. I did photo development for a year inside a major national supermarket. Honestly, I didn't see that many weird things because in the UK you have to report cruelty, abuse, etc. Most people are not stupid enough to implicate themselves, although I know cases do exist. I did see lots of photos of attractive people though, and the occasional hot snaps of couples. Lots of random photos of pets not doing anything. The worst ones though were photos of cakes. Cakes. I mean, like, who the duck ever gets a photo album out and is like, oh, the Victoria sponge, we had Lisa's 22 birthday, that was a good one. Cakes. Duck off, taking a bit of crap for the cakes comment. I know cakes are linked to emotional events. You know I know that. My point is, think of a wedding. Now think of all the family members lining up to take photos of the cake from the crap angles and lighting ever imagined. If your relative documented their journey to master baker, it is slightly different than 99 family members, all with the same C picture of a pineapple upside-down cake on an IKEA plate in a disco. Story 9. The photos were full of people with guns and doing meth. We made extra copies and gave them to the police. We never heard any follow-up, so I assumed nothing happened. Story 10. Slightly different perspective. But a few years ago, one of my college roommates found 2 disposable cameras that had never been developed. We finally had the pictures made up about 15 years after they were taken. Apart from a lot of group shots and alcohol, there was this one particular photo of a man and woman eating cereal at our dinner table completely naked. None of us have any idea who they were. Story 11. My best friend worked in the photo lab of a supermarket we both worked at during high school. A police officer mixed up two rolls of film he had, one being his family vacation photos and the other being photos from work. Guy take his life away. That messed her up a bit. She also saw a lot of CP. The police were called often. Story 12. Oh yeah, my time to shine. I actually develop film as a small side business. I'm a professional artist, photographer. I've come across many weird things, although two stand out. The less cool but pretty weird one was when I was sent film to develop from a friend of a friend. I've never actually met her, but I figured if they know this particular friend, how bad could it be? The one thing that stood out to me as a little odd was that this friend of a friend was hesitant to have her film developed by a professional lab. But some people are a little self-conscious of their shots, so whatever. The moment I took the film out of the chemical soup and held it up to the light, I couldn't believe what I saw. My eyes were serenaded with 24 frames of a group sex. Upon closer examination, I was pretty sure, beyond a doubt, that everyone in there was over 18, although some of the guys and girls looked pretty young. It gets better, though. The better story. One of the strangest things was a roll of film I developed a couple of days ago. The guy I got it from is a good friend of mine and works in Colorado, clearing out properties that have been abandoned, owner pass, etc. One day, he found some film on an abandoned property. No one claimed it, so he sent it to me to develop. This roll was old, as in very old, Ansco all-weather, so I wasn't quite sure how to develop it. I ended up stand developing the film, which involves agitating for 10 seconds, and then letting the film sit in the developing chemical for several hours. Normally, film is developed within a few minutes. When all was said and done, I found myself looking at family photos from a campsite in the Colorado mountains that were upwards of 70 years old. Miraculously, the latent image on the film survived all those years. The film was a bit foggy from age, which is why I think my stand developing method saved it. Story 13. I think my dad was accidentally the weirdest customer for an unsuspecting photo developer about 20 years ago. He found an old camera in our house that hadn't been touched in years. He couldn't remember what photos were on it, but assumed they were wholesome pictures of birthday parties, holidays, etc. He went to get the pictures developed on his lunch break at work the next day. Turns out my sister and I thought it would be hilarious to take pictures of our bums on the camera, which my dad had absolutely no idea about. He said the guy developing the pictures seemed to be in his late teens, early 20s, and gave him an extremely disgusted look and slammed the pictures down on the table. My dad had no idea what he had done to piss this guy off, because he had been perfectly friendly just a few minutes beforehand. He didn't realize why that guy was angry until he got home and looked through the pictures. Story 14. I worked for 3 different labs. I did a lot of stuff for the FBI. The worst was a car accident involving a lifted truck versus Jazzy scooter. Documented each piece. They were the only pictures I have ever seen and felt physically ill. I had to have my boss finish them. We also had a lot of industrial accidents. They usually involved someone falling off of high scaffolding or having a tool dropped on them accidentally. I turned down the job offer to be a lead evidence photographer for them when I was done printing for them. An elderly lady had taken care of her 4-year-old grandson and let him play in the backyard pool. She snapped a few pics of him to remember the occasion. A few weeks later, he and his mother were passed in an accident. She had to make the funeral arrangements, and the only pictures she had of the boy were of him playing in the pool in the nude. I helped her select a viable picture, enlarge the photo as much as possible, and use some creative cropping as well as a digital penectomy to make sure she could use the photo. Story 15. I worked in various photo labs in my late teens through early 20s. At the last 1-hour photo lab I worked at, we occasionally developed crime scene photos for the local PD, which was gruesome at times. We would also get an occasional nudie, which was a typical occurrence in the industry based on my experience. There was one customer, however, that sticks out in my mind as having a very offender-type vibe. It was close to the end of the night. I wasn't wearing my lab coat, and I had on a black tribe called Quest, the low-end theory shirt as I counted down the last couple of hours of my shift. A customer came in, complimented my shirt, and dropped off a roll or two to be developed. The male customer was quite charismatic. We had a passing conversation about the band, of which he did not seem to know about at all. His unawareness of the band struck me as a little odd, seeing as how he had complimented my shirt, which features a crouching woman whose form is revealed by blacklight sequel lighting and painterly lines of red going down her body with the band's logo above her head. I developed the customer's negatives and printed out his luster finish photos. His photographs were all selfies, probably accomplished with a timer and a tripod. This was before the smartphone era. I reviewed his photographs as I packaged them up. We had to ensure quality while also preventing the lab from disseminating adult imagery. This customer's selfies featured him fetishistically pulling up on paint hose that he wore on his head. He was shirtless in all his photos. He was pulling down on his shorts in few to reveal the top of his hip. As the sequence of images continued, the customer's photographs then began to feature him pouring red paint over his body, similar to the logo on my shirt. He was never naked in his photographs, so I had to package them up and prepare for Captain Creepy Red Paint Pantyhose Headman to come back to pick up his order. He came in at around the 1-hour mark to pick up his prints. I recognized him the second he came in. He had a totally different demeanor as I rang him up. He made no eye contact and was now terse and hurried. To this day, that guy creeps me out, and it's almost been 20 years. Story 16. I don't actually develop photos myself, but my professor, who used to be a social worker, told me some stories of some that she came across. Note, photo developers are to notify social workers if they come across anything weird or troubling. In one story she told us, she had picked up a batch of photos and gone to the house of the person these photos belonged to. At this point, she had not opened up the envelope to see what the photos contained. Upon arriving at the scene, she took a look and immediately threw up on sight. Now I was skeptical because I've never heard of someone throwing up from a photo. But then she finally told us what the images contained, and it all made sense. A man had taken photos of his wife, Pleasure herself. Story 17. A guy I used to work with showed me pictures of Miles Davis in a very nice bathrobe, vacuuming his living room. The guy had a friend who worked for a photo developer and had made extra prints for himself. Story 18. I used to do tech support for various commercial photo printers. One favorite was this. The mayor of their town came to develop film, get prints quite often, and something was wrong, of course, so they called us. Mayor had a big interest in old trains, and those were the photos being developed. Old photos of old trains. I noticed, however, that these old photos seemed to be pretty low quality, like when you take a picture of the screen, because it was. He'd look up old photos of old trains on Thur Internet, then with his film camera, take a picture of the screen, then bring it to the store to get prints and digital copies. The photo operator said she had tried explaining to him how to just save an image to skip the film step, but he just couldn't follow along. Another fun one was when someone accidentally uploaded the wrong photo album to the website to be printed and picked up at the location. Very wrong. Nudie pics. And the store called us because she was freaking out that the pictures were on the system now and couldn't be removed from her end. Store operator was also very uncomfortable because the software had a preview of the order, and it was the only order they had on deck. Every time we removed it, 30 seconds later, the software would query the website, notice an order it didn't have finished files for, and download once again. At that point, we couldn't actually fully remove anything from the site. All we could do was tell the software to not print it. In the end, all we could do was submit another sample order just to have something else to click on for a preview instead of this woman's boobs. There was also the occasional end user and web support. Why did my order get canceled without my permission? I checked the order. It's black and white photos of what is clearly an escort in a cheap hotel room doing dirty stuff. I try to be diplomatic. It appears that your order contained nudity, which we are not allowed to print. But it's art. Indeed, the pictures you submit for printing are often seen by several more people than just you and the developer. Story 19. I worked at a Ritz years ago, right around the time they started to disappear. There are really so many standouts. Various substances and their usage was big, but seeing a pile of coke is only exciting the first couple times. Some bros got a 12-month calendar made of their friend passed out at parties. There was a guy who always came in with multiple rolls of normal family photos. But one time, the last picture was him reclining nude on a couch with cans of beer surrounding him as he gazed into the camera. I removed the red eye for him, and I don't know if he ever noticed. It's really a thankless job. I had the older man who came in and only demanded, to use the Kodak self-printing station, but couldn't figure it out, so he had me select all his favorite clandestine public foot photos for print as he cleaned his ear with a Bic pen and wiped it on his jacket. That was not an experience I can say I enjoyed, but at the same time I kind of felt I needed to see it to the end. There were some bondage rolls on occasion dropped off by the most mild-mannered man, but they were like very amateur snuff film style with this big giant cowboy and lots of strangers coming and going from the scene. I never saw the cowboy in real life, only in the photos. Story 20. Worked in a photo lab for 15 years. I've seen a little bit of everything. A lab I worked for had an account with the crime lab, so we got in tons of crime scene photos. One that stands out was a guy that got caught in a giant auger. Think of a huge drill mounted onto the back of a truck used to drill holes for telephone poles. It looked like he was cleaning it off with a hose. The hose caught in the auger while it was spinning, pulled him into it. Pieces everywhere. Lots of amateur adult film. Story 21. People would send in nudes and more. One that stuck out to me was this couple who had all these unflattering nudes they wanted printed. They had gone on a cruise and apparently had a very good time. But our policy was no nudes for any reason. We explained this to the couple, but they stubbornly refused to give up. They tried to print this same set of photos 5 times, hoping to catch a different worker who didn't follow policy. We finally told them if they didn't stop trying to get those printed here, we would ban them. They would insist that they print things like this all the time. They'd try and tag team us by switching who was picking them up. Seriously, isn't there some other place to print your lewds? I was once helping a customer on our god-awful digital kiosk. He had hooked his phone up with a USB cord, which we often advise people not to do. The kiosk was frozen, so I was helping him move to a new one and get going. After he was settled, I went to reset the other unit. Just as I was getting to it, the kiosk unfroze and started to scroll through the 8,000 pictures he had been trying to load. Now, the problem with using the USB cable is that it shows every picture on the phone. All of them. A cascading wall of junk flew down the screen as I tried to get the kiosk to respond. I finally just unplugged it. The customer was so embarrassed. He finished his order, but I don't think he ever came back for it. Story 22. I worked in a pharmacy's photo lab for a couple years in high school and college, roughly 2008-2011, shortly before most places stopped having a full-out film development lab. I saw a lot of weird stuff. But the one that always stuck out on my mind was this one old man that would come in every week or two with a roll of film to develop. It was always photos of children playing in public places. Never the same kids, never from particularly close up, and they were never looking at the camera. This dude would just, post up on a bench in the park and take pictures of other people's kids. Story 23. My mom worked in a photo lab years ago, and these are the worst things she saw. An infected junk. The entire junk had swelled to the size of an eggplant and was beet red. She said it looked like it was going to pop. A nasty bachelorette party in which a girl shoved a lollipop inside of her and then a friend proceeded to suck it. Story 24. Oh, I can answer this. This was in the mid-late 90s. We were a small independent one-hour photo lab right smack in the middle of town. Lots of stories. The three that stick out the most. If you've ever seen the movie Parenthood with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis, there's a scene where a teen daughter had her dirty lovemaking pictures developed at the same photo booth as her mom's family reunion pictures. The photo tech searched for the last name, and he gave the mom the daughter's pictures and the daughter mom's pictures. This exact same thing happened with me. I gave the mom the pictures, and her eyes shot out. Oops. There was an adult website guy who lived in our town, and he used our lab to develop all of his pictures. He was really into women pissing. It's the first time I learned that if women use their fingers the right way, they can arch piss a long distance much like a man can. Story 25. Used to work at a one-hour photo in college. Ritz Camera in the Cary Town Center Mall, circa 1999. Mostly I was on sales, but sometimes I would run the printing rig. Forgot the model, but I'm pretty sure it was a Noritsu. And of course I saw any all wacky stuff that came through the store when I was on shift. 100% of all photos that came through there were typical boring crap. All of the 1% of interesting stuff that I saw was nudes or sex acts. Mostly naked women, but the occasional roll of junk pics. There was one in particular that I recall as being probably the most hilarious. There was a young couple who had taken half a roll of pics of themselves doing the nasty. She comes to pick up the prints later that day, acting totally like there's nothing out of the ordinary. I ended up running the register when she checked out and was having a hard time making eye contact with her. It must have started to dawn on her that all 4 of the guys on shift had seen her naked. I did manage to scare up enough balls to ask her if she wanted to review the photos to make sure our print quality was up to her standards. A common thing to ask customers at this store. She hauled ass out of there and didn't even take her change. Story 26. I used to work for Ritz Camera back in the late 90s. I've seen it all. Hunters prepping deer carcasses, sex and nudity. Yep. I worked in the DC area, and one of the locations I worked at was near the DEA. So I developed a lot of photos of Met labs that blew up and the people who pass as a result. Pics of people in a casket at their funeral was also popular. Story 27. I worked at a photo lab for 5 years and saw a lot. I got out right when digital was picking up and overtaking the 35mm market. Weirdest thing I saw was from a regular customer who would come in about every month and would always order single prints. The photos were always of feet in fancy high heel shoes. Think Strappy 6 in stiletto heels. I figured he had a fetish and nothing was overly pervy, so I never said anything. One day, he brought in a roll and a picture on it has stuck with me ever since I saw it. It was of a foot with a high heel on, but the leg attached to the foot was sticking out of a rolled-up comforter. It showed probably up to just about mid-calf, and it wasn't in a standing position like all the others. Sort of limply hanging. I've always wondered if he worked his way from fetish to something darker. Story 28. I had a couple come in with a digital camera full of vacation photos. I explained our procedure of printing a contact sheet they could use to decide which photos they want to print. They decided that the husband would stay to collect the contact sheet while the wife started their other shopping. I loaded the SD card into the computer and pulled up the photos. Normally, I didn't bother looking at the photos when they came up on screen, so I just hit the button to start printing contact sheets and handed them to the guy as they came out. After a minute of looking at the first page, he said, "Hey, can we delete the first photo?" "Of course," I replied. We'll only print the photos you want and ignore the rest. No, I mean take it off the page? This wasn't a normal request, so I checked my screen to see which picture he was referring to. I couldn't see any details because the picture was only about 150 pixels wide on the screen, but it was obvious what the photo was. There was the wife, sitting naked on a hotel bed, legs wide. "Oh, yeah, let me print a new contact sheet. Thank you," was the relieved reply. I deleted the picture and reprinted the first page with a blank spot where that photo had been. He folded up the page I'd given him and pocketed it. A few minutes later, she returned and they started discussing which photos to print. I don't know if she noticed that page 1 was missing something, but neither of them mentioned it. Story 29. Not a developer, but worked in a pharmacy that had photo service. This hot guy came in every week with rolls of pictures for development. One day, I could not stand any more suspense and peeked. They were core sample photos. Gets weirder. 0.5 years later, we moved to Diff State. Guess who was our new next-door neighbor? Geologists. Story 30. I find it weird that lots of people make prints of their selfies with Snapchat filters on. Or the text bar across them, are they going to put these in a photo album on their coffee tables? A weird one that sticks out was a woman printing off a family vacation album. Lots of happy pictures of her children and the sight they saw. Her and her husband, kids, husband naked, naked shots of her. And then it went back to pictures of her kids vacationing. Policy says we shred any indecent photos and had to try explain this when the lady came to pick them up with her young daughter.